Hello?
Is this Karen Eiffel?
Yes.
My name is Harold Crick. I believe you're writing a story about me.
I'm sorry?
My name is Harold Crick.
Is this a joke?
No, I work for the IRS. My name, Miss Eiffel, is Harold Crick. When I go through the files at work, I hear a deep and endless ocean.
Stranger than fiction.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hole.
And I'm Lee Esses. We are doing an episode today that is on a movie that I find highly entertaining and Lee doesn't really like at all.
It's good. It is entertaining. I just don't particularly like the main actor in this, so I go into this one biased. Today we're talking about Stranger Than Fiction. This is a very meta story, especially for people familiar with writing, with publishing, with that whole process.
We're just going to jump right into it and talk about the characters first. Their names, I feel they got very floral with them in the way that Jaws was intentionally as mundane as possible with their naming of characters. These characters definitely fit the groove. Anna Pascal, very bohemian name of a baker character name.
And then you have the main character, Harold Crick. It's a beautiful name for an IRS agent who is very rigid, who really follows a daily schedule down to the millisecond.
And then the last character is the beautifully European Karen Eiffel.
Now, arguably, there could be two main characters in this, though one gets more screen time than the other. And that is Harold Crick, the main character of Karen Eiffel's story, who is the other main character.
I feel like almost every named character had a plot arc to some degree, but definitely Karen Eiffel and Harold Crick had the strongest ones. Crick's was laid out and very obvious because of the path that he had to take within the story as well as within the movie. And then Karen's understanding of how to value life and how she looks at life will change her as an author, as well as gave her that humility to write a mediocre book, but make someone else's life better in the process.
I do think it was very interesting to see the choices that Karen Eiffel made through the story. Because at the beginning, you see her as kind of this manic character who appears to be trying to play God with the lives of other people in her imagination. She's got this mania going on where she sees death way differently than anybody else. So part of her arc, the struggles that she's facing, is having to come to grips that reality is not fiction, and she's let those lines blur a little bit too much. And then she gets confronted with the idea that what if all along they have been the same and she has been killing people?
One of the things that I found well done in a somewhat subtle way was the dialogue choice. Normally, when you talk about two very different characters and how they are shown through dialogue, we talk about education, we talk about how sophisticated of a thinker they are, these kinds of things. In this particular case, it was the artist mind versus the numbers mind. So you have the very poetic descriptions of the voiceover/author versus the very everyday common dialogue that you hear with the guy who works in an office. It was not used to modify his intelligence at all. It was used to make one feel like that story structure and one feel like that everyday real-life drama type structure.
And this is definitely one of those stories where the lines between the hero, the protagonist of the story, is different than the main character. Harold is the hero. He is the protagonist. But he is not necessarily the main character of the outer, bigger story.
Yeah, I would say that the main character is actually the author. She was the key in making sure that we had that happily ever after. He does decide to make that change and to live every day like it's his last, that kind of thing. which I think puts him strictly in that hero category of the old world order and the new world order of seeing life differently. But it's her actions that save the day.
As for the plot of this movie, the kind of identifiers that we can use for this indicate that they used a save the cat plot structure where you have an introductory of the secondary plot, the romance, a little bit late in the story, and then a pretty quick happily ever after.
Another key indicator of this is how long it took to get to the inciting action and how little time there was after. There were like 2 scenes after he gets hit by the bus, and the voiceover starts at like 4 minutes in, and part of that is credits of the movie. So there's very little beforehand and very little after. The whole drama heightens throughout the story and gets more complex, but we don't need to spend as much time in that happily ever after. We can see her spoon feeding him yogurt in the hospital and assume they live happily ever after.
Now, for the world building in this, so much of it is real world New York, except for the very obvious issue of having the narrator in their head. And there are a couple of things that I think they stretched a little bit. I did not understand how the professor went from being, it's probably just in your head, to, okay, I'll help you, just because of the line, little did he know. Because the psychology side of things, it's very plausible that the narrator in your head is a product of something like schizophrenia, is going to present as third-person omniscient.
I wonder if that's because you and I would think that because we're authors. He was an IRS agent. He has no rights to be in the literature department. That is not his field of expertise. So that's not something that he would think of. And therefore, that opened up the possibility, at least in the professor's mind, that maybe this is something that would be fun to pursue regardless of its actual validity or not.
Okay, I could see that. But overall, they did a pretty good job of presenting this impossibility in a way that seemed like Harold was still making his own choices and still had his own agency, while the author was still progressing independently. I think they balanced that really well between dictating his actions and not. Another aspect of the world building that was very good in terms of the visual elements is how they presented Harold's life and then the possibilities of what his life could be. All of his scenes where he's in his world, he's in his apartment, he's at work, he's doing his normal things, it's all very monochromatic, very boring, straightforward. And then he encounters this free-spirited baker, and everything in her life, all of her things are very vibrant, very colorful, very eclectic. And so it's this beautiful visual contrast of the 2 different worlds that they live in within the real world.
When it comes to world building, I do feel like it's important to look at how they released the relevant information. Even in a case like this, where it takes place in a city that many of us have been to and a place that we all know exists, they still had relevant information to release about the one impossible thing, if nothing else. A lot of the way that they executed that information was in the voiceover. Not just the voiceover saying this is how things work, but the voiceover narrating things, that deep and endless ocean that we referenced in the quote, so that we can draw the parallels for ourselves.
I also found it very interesting because it is the voiceover that prompts all of the action. The voiceover saying, little did he know his death was imminent, was the inciting action. And we get these little pieces that are very realistic for how you would consume a novel. You get these little tiny pieces of information along the way that pique your curiosity and go, oh, what is this about now? And it makes you keep reading. And so when he heard his death was imminent, he's like, okay, everything else has been right. So this is scary. I thought it was a very good use of those very small hints that you would, as an author, drop into your story.
The last thing I wanted to talk about was in the overall storytelling technique, there was a great use of that one impossible thing and how they utilized that narration. The voiceover wasn't just existing, it had a particular framework for a particular reason. They even kind of broke the fourth wall a little bit with that third-person omniscient in the narration. But I feel like that was a special nod to us authors specifically, because we've all been there and we've all had these moments where like, can I just see people die so I can write about it?
This is a brilliant movie to look at story structure, to look at character interaction, and especially that balance between author dictation and character choice. I think that's really what stood out to me, is that these characters still very much had a choice in their story, even as we see the author writing, narrating, and deciding some of the future.
We are coming up at the end of the month, and our final episode, besides our bonus episode, will be on the movie Big Fish. That one plays with the unreliable narrator a little bit. We'll talk about that next episode. But until then, I encourage you to have some of that self-reflection that this author did in Stranger Than Fiction, where she came to the conclusion that writing a just okay story without harming people is a very noble way to approach it.
I think it's a good excuse for us to remember that sometimes an okay novel is the good one, that is the one that we should be working on, that we should be issuing. Sometimes okay is good enough. And that starts when you
write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.